We're rolling.
Welcome to the REI Rookies Podcast.
The Real Estate Investing Rookies Podcast, episode number 52. That's 1 year, y'all, where we invite you to follow us on our journey towards financial freedom using the power of real estate. I'm Josh Koth.
And I'm Jack Haas.
And here at REI Rookies, we believe in a couple of key principles. Number one, the best way to retain information is by teaching it to others. And number two, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're not competitors. We're a community. So let's get into some real estate investing.
So, Josh, it's been a full year of doing this podcast. How does it feel?
Yeah, episode number 52. We've done one every Sunday. So, yeah, we realized, wow, we're creeping up on a year. And here we are. This is number 52. So, a solid year of podcasting. It's been interesting to say the least. And we thought it might be a perfect time to kind of recap how the podcast has evolved, what it's done for our business, and just how our real estate investing business has evolved as well in the last year since we started.
So, yeah, why don't we just start with the podcast then?
Mm-hmm.
When we started this, I don't know what your expectations were, but, if I felt it was more important regarding just reiterating what we've been learning.
Mm-hmm.
And then the secondary was being held accountable. When you say it out loud, it makes it more concrete, and it really has an impact on me mentally. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, there's lots of research out there that basically says if you have your goals stated aloud, you're just more likely to stick to them. And, we've done a lot of goal setting, a lot of mindset talk throughout the last year. And I think having a podcast has really helped us discuss a lot of issues mindset-wise and just really stay on track. And like you said, when you're teaching the material, it forces us to go through the entire business of real estate top to bottom just when we're deciding what to talk about, right? And as things come up, we say, hey, we should do an episode about that. So it allows us to really work through it from an objective viewpoint, which is kind of nice. If you're going to teach a certain topic to someone else, you really have to think it through and make sure you have thought it through objectively. So it's really given us a nice almost outside viewpoint into our own business at times, which has been kind of interesting and an unpredicted side effect. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I can agree with you more. It's really when you start to try to teach a little bit is when I found I learned the most.
Yep.
And then when you have any kind of interaction, when we're getting any feedback or when we're doing any kind of networking with our real estate investing group, when those questions and scenarios are being thrown around, that's really a great learning situation.
And you have to have your numbers figured out if you're going to teach something to someone else. If you're telling someone how you figure out what to offer on a property or how the numbers would work, I mean, there's just a higher level of accountability because you don't want to recommend something that's not going to work to someone else or that is going to contribute to their failure. So you really have to make sure you have all your numbers lined up and your calculations right when you're giving advice on something, as serious as real estate investing, which has the potential to change the trajectory of people's financial lives. So, you have to take it pretty seriously. So I think that's contributed to that too. Just helping to teach, we just take the material a little bit more seriously, and that boils over and spills over into our own business as well, where we have to hold ourselves to those same standards when we're running our calculations as well.
So what are some of the unexpected things that we've run into in regards to the benefits of doing this podcast?
Well, I mean, and we kind of knew this, and this is why we did a podcast, initially, was we knew we had to get the word out. That's one of the main things. So it's one of the main reasons one of the main things you want to accomplish when you're real estate investing. You want to tell everybody what you do. And, we're in networking groups, we're telling everybody personally, but you want to be able to scale that, right? And a podcast is one of the lowest cost ways to do that. I mean, it just takes our time, honestly, and just a little bit of money setting up the, electronic infrastructure to distribute it. But it's really one of the highest, cost to benefit, ratios, biggest bang for your buck, basically, as far as getting your name out there, establishing credibility, giving you some gravitas, all that kind of stuff. When we talk to private lenders or people that we're just doing business with. It just gives you a little bit more gravitas, for lack of a better synonym there, better credibility. It makes gives the appearance of being an expert in the field, even though anybody can literally start a podcast. I mean, what gives us the right to speak on this topic more than anyone else, right?
Well, and we even call ourselves the rookies.
Yeah, exactly.
It's in the title of the podcast, so we're not trying to hide behind the curtain here. I mean, we're pretty transparent on this show.
Yeah, we're not, and we definitely don't think we're know-it-alls, and we're learning, and that's been the goal of this podcast as much as anything, is us learning ourselves. And it's really more about sharing the journey, and hopefully other people who are getting started can learn from our experience as well. So that's been nice.
One of the things I've even somebody asked me once why we do the show, why we do the podcast. And I basically said, one of the answers I gave is, it's like the modern day version of writing a book.
Right.
I mean, people gravitate towards an audio format, whether they can listen to it in their car or, I mean, we're even on the Amazon Echoes. I mean, you can call up the show pretty much anywhere you're at.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty fun. Yeah, I'll do that. Just yesterday, I was doing the dishes. It's my annual time of doing the dishes. And I had Alexa play the latest episode of the podcast. It is pretty cool. So that's kind of fun. That's just a little fun side benefit things for us. It's pretty cool to see us listed amongst other real estate investing podcasts. So that's been kind of just a fun little thing as well.
It's been also fun to be able to. We've always had the tendency of reaching up, like when it's given us the option of speaking to people we may not have reached out to before, and learn from them directly. So
yeah, it's pretty cool. We've had some pretty big names on the podcast in the last year, and that's been really fun. And people we respect and admire that are way further along in their real estate investing journeys than we are. And that's our entire goal, is to learn and hopefully help others learn and get started in their journey too. So that has been pretty fun.
So one of the things that has surprised me is looking at the analytics associated with the downloads. And I didn't expect it. We have a pretty consistent and regular download rate that first week or two. It's pretty predictable. But what's really surprising is, and a lot of other podcasts don't experience this actually, is that we still have people downloading episode 1. It's like they find the show and now they start to check out the whole back catalog. So we're constantly seeing downloads of all the previous 51 episodes.
Yeah, and that is an interesting thing about real estate investing. Really, the basics of the business don't really change that much. I mean, as technology advances, obviously, there's better way to do lead gen and how you're going to do online advertising, things like that. But the basics of the business, buying a property under what it's worth and then selling it for what it's worth and making a spread there. I mean, the basics of the business don't change that much. So really the fundamentals that we've mentioned from episode 1 all the way through to now, episode 52, they're kind of evergreen, as they say in the business, right? So people can go back to those episodes, and I've done this when I listen to other real estate investing podcasts. I think when I started listening to the Epic Real Estate Investing Podcast, Matt Terrios, he was a good 6-7 years in by the time I found him. I just started on episode 1, and it was just as relevant that 6-7 years later as it was when he recorded it, because the principles don't really change. So that's kind of unique to real estate investing. So it's kind of fun. It's not like we're doing local, news of the day or something that expires 24 hours later. People can find this podcast 5 years from now and still learn from it. So that is nice.
So while we've been releasing these podcasts, there has been a couple small learning curves associated with how we were going to distribute it. We started off with, I guess we don't have to hide behind some of this stuff. So I'll just say Squarespace was our initial provider. Great websites. I mean, it had a very great and really nice front end. However, I'd spend half a Sunday trying to publish the podcast and spend a lot of time distributing it through all of the receiving agencies, if you will, on the web. So
Right.
everything was very manual hand holding, setting up separate RSS feeds for every single entity.
And then after talking to some other podcasters, they recommended Libsyn, right?
Yeah. So we went to Libsyn, and I'm not kidding. I bet you it has cut the amount of time that I spent on a Sunday to a fourth. I mean,
Which is great. I mean, that's something we preach in real estate, right? I mean, your time is valuable. So as much as you can outsource or automate, the better. So, learning things like that. Now, would you recommend to somebody starting out a podcast from scratch, just start with Libsyn right out of the gate?
Yeah, Libsyn or a similar service. Libsyn is one of the few actually right now that also distributes to Spotify, which is a growing. You can imagine Spotify is a big music company in the States.
Yep.
So that is something that we're seeing an increased download rate now, as we've been added to their catalog.
Right.
So that was one of the big reasons why we chose to really go Spotify to Libsyn. But once you get it set up, it couldn't be easier. I mean, and I have to admit, you and I both come from an IT background. This was a perfect example where I was overthinking and thinking I could outsmart the process.
Right.
And
with all things, and this goes for real estate investing and pretty much anything, you don't want to let perfection be the enemy of progress. So we just, even though we knew maybe Squarespace wasn't the perfect platform to start off with, we still started and just got it out there, and we've had an episode every week. So maybe you could speak to our decision to do a very consistent release schedule and how that's affected the growth of the podcast.
Well, they're expecting it, right? And you don't want to. In fact, there was one weekend where we had a hiccup on the Squarespace site. If you don't get a certain aspect of the steps just right, it can screw up the RSS.
Basically, it was delayed.
It was delayed, and I had actually gotten a couple messages asking where the podcast was.
Yeah, so I mean, if any one tip we could give to any future podcasters out there is have a consistent release schedule and stick to that. That's the single biggest thing you can do. Whether you're doing it daily, weekly, monthly, even if you can only crank out one a month, do it and set that schedule up and hit those targets, because that's the single biggest thing that will affect, your listenership and how you're received. People are, like you said, they're expecting an episode to be released. And as a listener of podcasts, I expect, in fact, I have a couple where I know, like I have some daily ones I listen to. I know like by what hour they're going to be released, and you're refreshing. If it's not there, you're like, what the heck's going on? So that's important to make sure you stick to a consistent release schedule.
And I think that consistency also has helped us in a couple things. It's that consistent, persistent behavior, not only in the podcasting, but just our everyday workday. We have our success report that we keep by our keyboard. It's going through that process on a regular basis, and eventually, hopefully, it'll become a habit.
Yep, exactly. So let's talk about how, that kind of wraps up the podcast and how that's evolved. Let's talk about how our business has changed in the last year, and maybe tie in how the podcast has contributed to that acceleration.
Well, I think one of the first things that you pointed to is not outthinking the process and getting things started. We recently basically hired another company to help us get some things in place, and the Libsyn thing was exactly one of those suggestions they made for us to improve our business. And taking into not only listening to podcasts like this, but when you are basically employing a mentor or engaging a mentor and they're giving you some direct advice, you need to act on it. And actually implement it. I think a lot of people will sit and listen to a podcast or read a book, But in the end, you got to act on what you're taking in order to really see a benefit from it.
And, I hate to compare myself or us to other businesses because that's not something we like to do. But I mean, I had a situation the other day that illustrated this point perfectly. Before I bought my first property, I'd taken a little real estate investing class at a local gentleman's house. That was just kind of a buddy of mine. And I was kind of interested. And we went through this class. We met like once a week for about 4 weeks. And there was another guy in this class. And just a few days ago, this is 2 years ago now, just a couple days ago, I had lunch with this guy that taught the class and then one of his buddies who was also in the class with me. And, now we've done 42 transactions since then, right? And he hadn't done anything yet. And he was just kind of kicking himself, saying, God, I'm an idiot. Why didn't I take some action, right? And, like I said, I hate to compare myself, not saying I'm better or anything like that, but it's just when, the guy that brought the class on wanted to have him meet me and discuss my experience because he wanted to try to give him a little kick in the butt, right? Like if you would have just taken some action over the past couple of years, you could have been this much further along in your investing career. So that just illustrates the point of you got to get out there and make things happen, take action. Things are never going to be perfect. If you wait for the situation to be perfect, I need to have X amount of money saved up, or got to wait for the market to turn around. Prices are too high. All those excuses for not getting started, you're going to look back years later and regret. And then you see other people who are doing business because they just surrendered to the process and just started. You can talk yourself out of just about anything. And when you think about all the offers we submit that look ridiculous, compared to the asking price, and we know they're not going to accept them, but we still submit them anyways. A lot of people don't take that step of actually submitting the offer. We will. And I think that has made all the difference.
Well, I mean, we had just an example yesterday where how many times did we offer on that place in Moorhead?
Yep.
I mean, we're very consistent and persistent in our behaviors, and it does eventually pay off. Josh, I don't know how many times did you submit an offer on this one place?
At least twice. I mean, we went after it at least twice. I talked to the owner. I found him on Facebook, friend requested him, called him up. So we started a relationship. And then when I saw it come back in the market, we pounced again. And this time I think we're just tired of owning the property and wanted it gone. So, finally the conditions were right for them to accept our offer. But without having submitted two previous times and just really keeping a close eye on it, we wouldn't have gotten that property. So you got to be consistent.
And that goes to one of the best pieces of advice that I've heard, is you can never say the wrong thing to the right person, and you can never say the right thing to the wrong person. Mm-hmm. In the previous two situations, it was the wrong person.
Yeah, they just weren't ready yet.
They weren't ready yet, and it wasn't the right conditions. But by the third time that we ran into it, the conditions and are out. It was the right thing to the right person, and now we're going to be sitting at the closing table here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, you got to be ready when that opportunity presents itself. And if you're not submitting offers and you're not in the game, you're not going to be the one that has a chance of getting it. And believe me, we've lost out on plenty of deals. 98% of our offers get just soundly rejected. And that's just, how you have to figure your numbers are going to be. But we keep submitting them even with that, some would say, really high failure rate. 98% of the time our offers fail. But, we keep submitting them consistently. Luckily, we have, an agent that is willing to take the abuse from listing agents. And it's worked out great for him because he's done a ton of deals with us and makes some nice commission checks on every one of those. So,
well, I think, along those same lines, one of those things that I can't say enough, and frankly, we've seen and talked to other people who've run into this problem. When you know those numbers and you start to do the consistent behavior, I guess I'm going to say don't do a deal for the sake of doing a deal either.
Right.
It's important for you to start taking those actions, but I'm going to be the first to admit, I feel it's almost like stepping into a casino or an auction or something. You start to want to do a deal for the sake of doing a deal. You have to know when you're the wrong person at a certain point too, and the deal isn't right, and you have to know when to just shut off and walk away.
Yep, and that gives you a lot of leverage too. The power to walk away is the most power that you have. So when you figure out that's why it's so important to have your calculations and your numbers figured out at the start, because you know the top amount you could pay for a property, and you stop there and walk away. And then if they want to chase you, if they're the right person at the right time, they'll chase you back down to your price. So, but not to get too deep in the weeds with transaction and negotiating and talk. So let's get back
to like another topic for another podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've probably covered this 5 times already. And that's one thing in the podcast too, over the course of the last year. I mean, we talk about the same things quite a bit, but I feel like we need that constant reinforcement, and you just got to beat yourself over the head with the basics, with the basic principles, the fundamentals of real estate investing. So, we'll talk about offers and your numbers. I mean, and mindset, like consistently. Those topics come up all the time because it's so important. I mean, mindset is the single biggest crucial element you have to have in place. And then secondarily, having your numbers figured out. So those things are always going to be a topic of conversation in the podcast. But let's talk about how the podcast has helped real estate investing and how the business has changed for us. You're full time in the business, working side by side with me now. So that's been a big change. That was a goal of ours last year.
Yeah, lucky you. Lucky you.
Right. So we've achieved that. So that's been great, and that's really helped us up our efforts as far as being able to get deals under contract and do more deals too. So when we set a goal this year, I think last year we did how many? 12 transactions.
12 transactions.
This year we tripled our goal to 36. And right now we're on pace to hit that. We've done 10 so far this year.
We almost did our full year's goal in the first quarter of this year already.
Yeah, from last year. Yeah, we almost hit last year's goal within 3 months. So, and just as you get better at this too, and that's part of the podcast and networking and just telling everybody what we do, people start to bring you deals, right? I mean, and the more lines you have in the water, the wider net that you're casting out there, you're more likely to get deals that will work. So, we've had all different sources provide us with deals in the last year too. So it's been kind of fun to see those expand. But I would say the podcast directly contributes to people bringing us deals from a referral basis. So that's almost the best leads you're going to get. I mean, we've closed a much higher percentage of deals that people have brought to us personally than through any other method.
Yeah, there's no question of that. And one of the other aspects of this podcast is we've already talked about when you're talking about and teaching others what you're learning, building that muscle in making you comfortable with the topic, so that when you are talking to somebody one-on-one, whether it's in a networking scenario or a motivated seller, it's really helped. It's almost like a role play,
right?
And I've hated doing role plays in the corporate world for majority of my life. Just dreaded it. But doing this type of podcast has really been really helpful in that regards. It goes back to the concept, you are the sum of the 5 people you hang out with the most. Right. As far as I'm concerned, this podcast is one of those people.
Right.
I mean, when we sit down and talk on a weekly basis about whatever's on top of mind at that time, it really helps us in the day-to-day aspects.
Also, there's some reciprocity at play, right? When you're helping others by providing knowledge and just giving, because really, we don't charge for the podcast. It's just a free resource for people, hopefully that benefits them. People, as the natural effect of reciprocity, they want to help you out. So they are just a little bit more likely to possibly bring you deals because they want to maybe work with somebody that they listen to, that they hopefully respect our opinions. And that is at play, just to be, completely transparent. There's some of that reciprocity at play as well. So that's been a side benefit. It's almost hard to calculate. You can't say how many deals did we do as a direct result of having a podcast. If we wouldn't have done a podcast, how many fewer deals would we have done? It's really hard to quantify that, but I just know that it benefits us personally talking about this stuff all the time. And it does benefit other people. So that alone is reason enough to do it. But it has contributed. And, we just subscribe to the abundance mentality, right? We're just going to give, and people will want to reciprocate naturally, and the deals will come your way. And we don't expect that. We don't expect listeners to bring us deals, but it's just an organic truth. We just know it's going to happen as a result of being out there.
Yeah. And so we're going to ask you for and cash in some of that reciprocity by going to our Facebook page or sending us an email, because we would love to hear any feedback. If you'd like to see any changes, one of the things we are experimenting with right now is you can go to the YouTube page, and we post a audio version of the show as well as a video version of the show. Mm-hmm. We already are fully aware that we need to get a different camera for Josh. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to improve the way he looks that much, but
yada.
But if you do have any other feedback on how we can improve the show, or if you want to hear a specific topic, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, if you have suggestions for things you'd like covered, that would help us out greatly. We love to answer questions directly about specific deals or things you'd like to learn more about. We could definitely use that feedback. So hit us up, info@reirookies.com. Also, make sure to check us out on Facebook or Twitter @REIRookies. And if you like what you're hearing, head over to iTunes, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really helps other rookie investors out there find the show.
And remember, get off the bench
and get into the game. We'll see you next time. Thanks for a great year.